Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Capuano. I'm the chair of the planning board. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Somerville Planning Board. It is Thursday, September 17th at 6:01. We are meeting virtually. With me tonight are planning board members Sam Denning, Jahan Habib, and Rob Buchanan. The only item on our agenda this evening is a continuation of a public hearing that has already been opened, which is the MPSP for 101 to 153 South Street. I know that our colleague Amelia has previously recused herself, and because she has recused herself previously, she will not be in attendance this evening because this is our only item on the agenda. So, pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, as well as Mayor Curtatoni's declaration of emergency dated March 15th, 2020. This meeting of the Planning Board will be conducted via remote participation. We'll have an audio recording available upon request as soon as possible after the meeting. This meeting is being recorded. As I mentioned, this is the continuation of a public hearing that has previously been opened on basically the Boynton Yards master plan. And we took oral testimony and have received written testimony on this to date. The intent this evening is to hear from staff and from the applicant on their responses to those concerns, those questions, see where we're at in the process now. I expect that we will get to a point this evening, I hope, that staff and the applicant will come together over the next few weeks and come up with some mutually agreeable conditions, which is the first point at which this board would be eligible to vote on this application. However, it's my expectation that our next meeting on October 1st, we will perhaps see those conditions for the first time. The public will see those conditions for the first time. I will open it up for public testimony again once those conditions are released and are discussed. And so I don't expect that this board will be voting on this until probably at least the next meeting after October 1, which I think is October 15, just so folks have an idea of the process that we intend to go forward with, because this is a complicated master plan, and we want to make sure that when the conditions are released, that the public who has previously weighed in will have an opportunity to provide comment and testimony on kind of the final product on which this board will take a vote at some point in future. So just so everyone who's listening understands what is going to happen this evening, it's going to be mostly informational and educational, with discussion by members of the board, to staff, and to the applicant. So what I'd like to do now is welcome, I think Melissa is going to do a presentation on the status of this application and where we are today. So if Melissa is unmuted, I think this is her screen. I'll invite you to go forward.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Michael. This is Melissa Woods. I'm a senior planner in the Planning and Zoning Office. And after the meeting last time, including the public testimony and the written comments, we felt best that it would be good to have a joint presentation this evening trying to address questions and concerns that came up in those forums. So first, I wanted to remind everyone where we are in the master plan special permit process. I think this is the second time the planning board has seen a master plan special permit application, and we're working with a new zoning code, so I think it's always good to have this sort of refresher. The application in front of you is regulated by the master plan districts article and specifically the Boynton Yards sub area. Some of the things that are required by the zoning are some required thoroughfares that may or may not run through a development site, that 5% of commercial square footage or 20,000 square feet needs to be dedicated to a community center, that 20% of civic space, 20% of land area minus the thoroughfares needs to be dedicated to civic space, that 75% or greater of the square footage needs to be dedicated to commercial floor space. That's to help balance our housing and jobs ratio in Somerville. And that 10% of the commercial square footage of any master plan needs to be dedicated to arts and the creative economy. So those are some of the high points of the zoning. But there's also findings that the board can consider in deliberation of any master plan application. Those are consistency with Summer Vision and other existing policy plans of the city, the zoning district's intent, the alignment and connectivity of the thoroughfare network, the gross floor area of different use categories, mitigation proposed to alleviate adverse impacts of the utility infrastructure, and then proposed development phasing and proposed on-street parking. So those are the findings that will be considered as part of this master plan. And lastly, are conditions that can be placed on any master plan discretionary permit review process. Conditions can ensure compliance with the board's findings, and they must have a rational nexus to potential impacts. Rational nexus is a fun planner and legal term, but it basically means it needs to be in relationship to. Just because a project's happening in Boynton Yards doesn't mean that you can ask for improvements in Davis Square unless there's a relationship between the two, for example. There are some required conditions. The planning board shall require applicants to provide for infrastructure, transportation, and community impact mitigation, and also that the planning board shall establish construction permitting phasing requirements. So there will be no master plan special permit application granted without these conditions because of the word shall. So a master plan special permit locks in an overall entitlement within a development site boundary. But I want to remind everyone that the buildings, civic spaces, and thoroughfares all require additional development review. And in this case, that means a site plan approval. And the site plan approval process is spelled out in Article 15, but that does include a community meeting, design review, an additional community meeting. So there's opportunities to present a project and get feedback, visit design review and get feedback, and then that additional community meeting is to report back about the feedback that's been heard on that two-stage process to present what will likely be the application to the planning board. There can be alterations to a master plan special permit. Some are deemed minor and can be approved by the planning director, and major amendments require a public hearing like we're gathered here today. So to remind everyone where we are, we have a complete master plan application that complies with the zoning requirements. We've released a staff memo that describes the project and analyzes it. The next staff report, as Chair Capuano mentioned, will include findings and proposed conditions prior to the October 1st meeting. And then the planning board will consider these findings in their deliberations. So a lot of the testimony received had a lot to do with follow-up on the Union Square neighborhood plan. And I want to remind everyone what a neighborhood plan is. It's our best attempts at coming together as a community, city and stakeholders with the help of consultants to figure out what our desired outcomes are and to document those outcomes. Because if you don't set goals, it's very hard to achieve those goals. A plan takes about 18 to 24 months, and it takes into consideration the information that we have at the time, but it's not a substitute for further work, because our work really starts when the plan is adopted, because there's another 20 to 30 years of implementation behind every adopted neighborhood plan. And although we work towards that implementation every day, I know to the Somerville constituency, it's not always visible work. So I'm trying to follow up on some of these items here, and I acknowledge we're not the best at sharing our work, so I hope you all are receptive to that here. So one of the topics that came up in the testimony was the Earl Street underpass. The plan conveys a vehicular, cyclist, and pedestrian connection, showing really only accounting for the structural elements of a bridge with the Green Line tracks running over top. But in further investigation, the additional infrastructure under the railroad tracks really make this idea infeasible. There's only about 6 to 7 feet of drainage under the tracks, but in addition to that drainage, there's a flood wall that separates the Green Line extension tracks from the commuter rail that goes down to the clay layer. Some back of the envelope calculations would mean that the bottom of that tunnel would be about 35 feet below grade. To get this tunnel built would require technology similar to tunneling under a riverbed. But that 35 feet that the roadway would have to be sunk would take about 700 feet on each side to ramp down into that tunnel. And to give you a picture of what that 700 feet would be, on the north side of the tracks, it's about 700 feet to Somerville Ave. And on the south side of the tracks, it's the Somerville-Cambridge line. So not only would the bridge be, would the tunnel be difficult to construct, highly expensive, bordering infeasible, it would also greatly change the urbanism on both sides of the tracks. So the topic was brought up, if not under, why not over for cyclists and pedestrians and create that connection? And an ideal connection would be a midway point between Medford Street and Prospect and Webster, which falls around the development site boundary. A future staff report will include a proposed condition to not preclude connecting a pedestrian bridge at Civic Space number 3. But we want to keep this in mind for any proposed developments in the reddish area shown on the plan. But the construction of that pedestrian bridge, the burden to construct that bridge, would actually be placed on future zoning districts or the expansion of the Union Square East zoning district over the target site here.
Melissa, can I ask you, could you go back one, please?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I've got actually just 2 questions on the concept. So first of all, thank you for explaining why the underpass is just, it's not in, I think, the realm of feasibility for construction. But for the potential overpass,
yes,
who would, if this is going over tracks, who owns the land and who would be responsible for the construction of that overpass? Would that be the city? Would that be private developers? Who would we be looking at to make something like this happen? Because it was something that was raised quite a bit as is a connection between the north and south aspects of Point Yates.
Yes, it could be built in a variety of ways. I'm proposing here that private development on the north side of the tracks would be responsible for building the bridge. Of course, there could also be a payment for the city to construct it. The idea being that the city's involvement is in support, but not monetarily for the project. So the city could be paid to do it. Private development could do it, but this would all be in close coordination with MassDOT being the owner of the land. Anything passing over the GLX tracks would need their review and approval.
Of course, I guess my question wasn't as well phrased as I thought it was, but the placement of the payment of building of this overpass would be something that would be within the planning board's purview to condition in future iterations and next steps of the plan. Is that right?
Yes, yes. I see this actually panning out in, there has, you know, Chair, as you remember from future or earlier iterations of the zoning that didn't get adopted, this entire area, including on the other side of Medford Street, was zoned, had an overlay district called Union Square East, but there was calls for further planning work in this residential neighborhood and around the Target site, and that resulted in a smaller Union Square East zoning district that's east of Medford Street. So I think in future expansions of any zoning district, pardon me, there's opportunity to create required connections similar to Thoroughfare 1 being proposed by this development, making a required pedestrian and cyclist connection as part of this overlay district. Was I able to answer your question?
Yes, you were. Sorry, I was muted. Sorry.
Okay.
You did. And obviously, I just want to remind other members of the planning board that if you have questions as we go along, it's certainly you know, your opportunity to jump in, ask questions, and clarify things that you would like Melissa to help out with. And anybody else who's in attendance that can answer the questions like the applicant.
Great.
May I, Mr. Chair, may I ask, just as long as we're talking about this topic of the pedestrian crossing, when we say adding a condition to approval of this master plan special permit, would it be, is the proposal that the condition be, you know, simply not to preclude a pedestrian crossing here, or would the condition be, you know, I mean, I think there's things that even this applicant could do to effectuate a pedestrian crossing, including, you know, building up kind of an elevation or some sort of a landing, a place to land the bridge on the south side of the tracks and whatnot. So I guess that's maybe I'm putting the cart before the horse in terms of.
So Rob, what I think we're doing, and I just want to remind everybody that this is a 30,000 foot document and plan. So I think we're erring on the side of being a little general and a little open-ended by not precluding that, so we aren't playing our hands at this stage of kind of global development on what we are expecting in a more detailed level. Because if something that you're proposing is what I think comes out as the best option, I think that's certainly something we would consider as well. But I think by not precluding it, it's because right now it wouldn't be allowed. But by saying it wouldn't be precluded by a future application or a future condition to a site plan approval, it gives us the leverage and the leeway to plan the best path forward as we get to that next stage. That's how I read it.
Thank you.
All right, I'll continue on, but please, everyone, this sort of open discussion and interruptions is acceptable and appreciated, actually. Otherwise, you're going to hear me drone on a little bit. So the neighborhood plan also envisions an off-street path running with the Union Square spur of the Green Line extension. This is the graphic from the Union Square neighborhood plan showing the bike facilities envisioned, some of which are implemented or are being implemented right now. If you haven't been down to Somerville Ave lately, ditch your car and check it out. It's really coming together. But the path has different levels of feasibility. The path is highly feasible through a condition of not precluding for railroad abutters that are part of the transformational area, which runs from Prospect Street on the backside of D3, which I'm showing now with my mouse, and extending through the Boynton Yards overlay area. It gets really tricky eastward of the overlay district because the rail right-of-way did not plan for an off-street path, which means we'd be looking for private land holdings to shoulder that burden, and that's really not anticipated in this area and eastward of the overlay district. So the plan might have also envisioned an at-grade connection where the community path runs in this corner of Brick Bottom. This is the Brick Bottom Artist Lofts for context. But actually what's in construction is shown in the picture above. Once again, if you haven't been out to this area, please take a look. There's a lot of pretty transformational infrastructure work happening in Somerville right now. But this is the Union Square spur of the Green Line extension. Up above is the Washington Street destination direction of the Green Line extension. And above that is the community path. So a connection to bring our paths together is actually only desired or feasible south of the satellite imagery. So what we're proposing instead of that connection along the backside of the buildings is bringing the bike connectivity into the neighborhood through shared streets or protected bikeways, running from Webster Street through the neighborhood. On Medford Street, there's a protected bikeway already proposed and I think likely to be implemented this fall, which would bring cyclists southeast on Medford Street, where they can use an existing off-street path that runs through Gore Park in Cambridge. And then there's a proposed connection on the east side of McGrath Highway. There is potential for more connections or a revised connection in Twin City Plaza based on redevelopment schemes there in the future. And planning staff is working on the future condition of what Columbia Street and Windsor Street will be, Windsor Place will be in the two arrows pointed here. So an alternative to the neighborhood plan that we feel actually addresses the needs in a better fashion.
Melissa, is there a reason, sorry, can you go back to that slide?
Sure.
Thanks. Is there a reason that the path wouldn't go along the south side of the rail as long as it can and then cut south from there?
It certainly could. What's shown in the gray area here is the development site boundary. So there would be a piece missing, but that's potential here. You do have a lot of change of grade that you could skip by changing the east-west path throughout the neighborhood. You know, you're going uphill at getting to the Webster and Prospect intersection. So there's pluses and minuses to keeping it as presented in the neighborhood plan.
Yeah, it seems like one of the, especially in some of the public comments, one of the benefits, it seems like there's a desire to stay out of the neighborhoods, to stay off of roads as much as possible. I think the path seems like it serves a somewhat different purpose as a bike lane than a bike lane. So obviously I don't know the details there, but just to keep that on the radar.
Absolutely. There's 4 different, I didn't brush up on this, but there's 4 different types of cyclists. This was all done by, I think it was the Portland Department of Transportation. There's the spandex wearers, which are a very small percentage, the enthusiastic, which I think is about 10%. And then there's concerned, but cautious and concerned. And those are the people, that's a big chunk of people, like 40 or 50% of the people that we want to be shifting trips from other modes to cycling, or from especially single occupancy vehicle trips to walking and biking. And they feel most comfortable in more protected facilities. So what's shown here in green are actually protected bikeways. So they would be separated from cars, but yes, it's not, it would be street adjacent. So in the analysis portion of the staff memo that has been released, we looked at the Union Square neighborhood plan, specifically the development section, and there was a lot of discussion about honoring the Prospect Hill landmark and creating an iconic skyline for Somerville from the Prospect Hill landmark in the neighborhood plan discussion. And that's because there is so much interest in the history of Somerville. Prospect Hill right now is very visible southward. And the city just invested a lot of money in both CPA funds in preservation of that monument, but also in a new park. So if you haven't been there, it opened, I think, a week ago this Friday or 2 weeks ago, and it's pretty exceptional. So to follow up,
Melissa, I'm going to put a plug in for myself. I was the Community Preservation Committee when we allocated that money a few years ago. And I think it's some of the best stuff that we've ever spent money on. It's such an important part of our history that that it's a really welcome investment in our neighborhood. So thank you for remembering.
Yes, thank you so much, Michael, and the Community Preservation Act Committee. So everybody take a trip, picnic there this weekend. I have for you this evening some further information. So in regards to honoring the Prospect Hill landmark by preserving views, this is a picture that was taken this week from the 101 South Street construction site, or Building 1 in the master plan application, looking up towards Prospect Hill Tower. And you'll see that the gentleman here is fairly aligned with where the western edge of Building 4 will lie. So Prospect Hill will be visible for a time being there, but actually what's in 2 elements of the neighborhood plan are actually working against one another, and sometimes it's a planner's job to balance that. So these, for lack of a better description, awnings or roof coverings are about 1 story tall. So to limit we need to work on preserving the right views of Prospect Hill Monument, because anything greater than 1 story in certain parts of Boynton Yards will actually work against the employment and residential density that we've envisioned in the neighborhood plan. There's a great view from Windsor Street that I think we should be working to preserve. The other topic related to this in the development chapter was creating an iconic skyline from Prospect Hill Monument. And this is another picture taken this week that shows 101 South Street in construction, building 1. The Taza Chocolate Building. This is the D2 site filled with GLX activity and Somerville Ave activity. And then in the background here, the Cambridge Housing Authority building just over the line. And so a future staff memo will include a proposed condition about more views from Prospect Hill Tower during the later site plan approval stages. So with that, we've reached the portion of the hearing where I'd like the applicant team to address their follow-up items. I'd like to introduce John Fenton, part of DLJ Leggett McCall's team.
Hello,
Yes.
John Fenton with DLJ in partnership with Leggett McCall Properties and the developer of Boynton Yards. Thank you once again for coming to hear our story. We're excited about moving this thing along, and I just want to briefly say before I introduce another one of my associates that we're very excited about moving forward on this. We're well capitalized. We have a good development team put together, and we've been listening and reacting to and conforming our project to the zoning, as well as the considerations of the community. We continue to talk to the community, and I will even be having more meetings next week with members of the Union Square Neighborhood Council, we expect to continue that dialogue even after approval. We look forward to moving this thing forward. I do want to just quickly reiterate that this project will deliver approximately $12 million a year when completed in new commercial real estate tax revenues. And over the next 5 years, as the buildings are brought in into construction and completed, it amounts to approximately $33 million of new tax revenues over the next 5 years, and as well as close to $20 million of community benefits. So it's the right product at the right time, and we look forward to moving this forward. I would like to introduce Rolla Andrus with Leggett McCall Properties. He's the project manager with our partner.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Melissa, and the board, and everyone listening tonight. So we'll take this opportunity to answer a few of the questions that came up from the board and the public. Next slide. So in response to the question on the vehicular entry to Building 2, this plan is an early concept diagram showing the active edges around the north side and Thoroughfare 1, as well as the civic space on the east and Windsor Street on the west. We plan to consolidate service on the south to keep all 3 edges that are pedestrian focused more active. The main concept is that the building faces Union and draws pedestrians from Union Station to the northwest corner of the site, orienting them diagonally through the lobby, marked here on the drawing as public, to the central civic space. From there, pedestrians will also get visual connection to the front door and lobby of 101 South. The diagonal connection of lobby of Building 2 will also serve as a market/public art space with the ability to open up to the outside in good weather while covered by an arcade. We envision seating areas and more market space outside in connection with the curbless thoroughfare on the north. Through this concept, the civic space bleeds into the thoroughfare and the active permeable north side of Building 2. Sorry, I'm not controlling slides. Melissa, you go next. Yeah, thanks. So in our previous presentation on September 3rd, we showed a similar map highlighting city thoroughfares and our pedestrian and bike routes. Based on a public comment around connectivity of green space, civic space, and ground floor building use and relationships between built space and open space, we've added a plan layer here of building active use onto the map. As you can see, the purple-blue edges of our buildings are always fronted by green open space with wide sidewalks and street trees that will buffer from vehicular roadways. It'll be fairly easy to connect between our civic spaces either through planted sidewalks or building active edges. In addition, Thoroughfare 1 on the north is a pedestrian curbless roadway that encourages through passage safely at any time. At a larger scale, the city's envisioned thoroughfares shown here in green lines make it possible to connect seamlessly from this development site to other envisioned green spaces around us, like those of USQ. The next slide is a similar plan, but it shows South Street realigned, making it possible to have a larger civic space in the future and keep cars further away from South Street and all the green spaces envisioned. As we continue to develop and refine the designs of our specific buildings, we'll be rendering more aerial views that show our visions. Based on a public comment asking for more views, we'd like to share a few photographs at this time from a large physical model we made that's currently living in our marketing center at 153 South Street. Our development is shown in wood and the context is in white. This is an aerial view from the Union Square area. And you see the green line tracks in the center, followed by larger buildings in the foreground of USQ, from left to right, D1, D2, D3, with our buildings in the background. Next slide. This slide zooms in further to the USQ development in the foreground and ours in the background. Again, here we're looking from the west side, and the buildings to the right of the tracks are D3, and to the left of the tracks you see D2. This view is taken from northwest, almost as if we're standing on Prospect Hill. Again, we see USQ in the foreground, D5 on the left, D6 closer to the center, beyond that D1 and D2. For our site, we're seeing north, the parcel 4 buildings and the north side of building 2. Here we're zooming in closer to our site, and the image on the left shows a view from the southeast with building 3 in the foreground, 101 South next to that, and building 2 behind. USQ is in the background. The image on the right is an aerial from the south, sort of top view, showing our 4 buildings, central civic space with the green line tracks behind and Target to the north. This image we are seeing is from the west, showing USQ's D3, D4 in the foreground, the tracks to the left, and to the right, our development. You see building 2 and the enlarged future civic space on the right. These last 2 photos, on the left, we see the view from Union Station, and you see the track lines going to our site in the background. We're seeing D2 and D3 to the left and right of the tracks, respectively. The image on the right shows our site from the east, if we're close or above Cambridge Street, with building 3 in the foreground, 101 South behind that, and then building 2 far behind, USQ Way in the background. Melissa, I'll turn it back to you and the board if anyone has questions. I think Rob has a question.
Actually, did Rob have a question? Because I have one as well. Rob, go ahead first.
Oh, thank you. I have a question. On that very last slide that you showed, I think it displays it well. But some of the other aerials, I think, do a nice job of helping me formulate my question here. As I'm looking at building number 3, and to some extent, my question also applies to building number 2, you know, but in particular, building 3, You know, this massing, you know, and I recognize we are not at the design phase yet. I guess one question I have is, you know, you're proposing what's called a lab type building, which is not to be confused with a lab use building or a use. Did you consider, you know, a block building or a podium with a tower? And in part, I'm asking because this building type next to such a low scale neighborhood is a somewhat of a juxtaposition. What are your thoughts on how to address weaving these buildings in over time?
Sure, I think that
Before you
we
get
did that.
started, I just want to say Rob basically asked a more erudite question than I would have, but on the exact same issue.
Great. So we did actually consider a number of building types, and we went through, you know, block building, a general building, as well as considering a podium with a tower. But again, we do want this to be a lab building. This for now is just a form, and it is actually the maximum build that we would do. I think we're showing 12 stories here, but it wouldn't. I don't think we'll reach 12 stories. Same with the building in the background. So building 2 right now is shown there at 12 stories. We will not be building 12 stories. So we've brought it down a bit. So I think that, you know, building a lab building, the floor plate will drive the dimensions of what it will be ultimately. But I'm sure that we will study how that interacts with the neighborhood directly to our east side, and try to buffer that. And if there's any way that we can step the building back, we will definitely do so. I don't think that there's anything stopping us from trying to, you know, respect the neighborhood directly to our east side. So I mean, in conclusion, I think that the massing you see there is definitely not the final massing, and will be studied further.
Thank you very much. At least for my concerns, that's what I was expecting you were going to say, was that this is basically the maximum potential building. We will revisit it when the special permits come before us for specific parcels. But you're right, the way it presents just makes me say, okay, we
Yeah,
really
no, I mean, we even feel it looks
take
big.
a cautious eye before we. Now, I actually don't know if they're residential neighborhoods behind you, or if it some of them look like they might be commercial buildings or warehousing or something. But either way, I think Rob's right. It seems like, you know, and from nothing, you know, the Emerald City. I do think that's right. We do have a little bit of a concern with a maximum build out that we will be looking at with a finer eye on how to make sure that these neighborhoods transition in an appropriate way when that time comes before us.
Absolutely.
Hi, everyone. It's Melissa again. Shall I continue?
Please.
So the last portion of this presentation is just really what our next steps are. To remind you, we have a published staff memo that describes and analyzes the project. And the next staff memo will include the findings for your consideration and proposed conditions. And as Chair Capuano said earlier, we have 2 planning board hearing dates in October, the 1st and the 15th. I want everyone to remember that any proposed conditions have to fall within certain buckets spelled out in the zoning. So once again, they can ensure compliance with the board's findings. They have to be rationally connected to the potential impacts of the project. But there are also some required findings. In particular, the the planning board shall be required applicants to provide utility infrastructure, transportation, and community impact mitigation. And I'd like to address those further. In regards to utility infrastructure, we've known since the neighborhood plan that the Boynton Yards neighborhood needs significant infrastructure investment to achieve the type of buildings that both the city and the community want, that are envisioned in the plan and that a developer may want to build. Staff has been developing a shared cost model that distributes costs across the entire sub-area district to be conditioned in a covenant. In relation to transportation mitigation, the developer is proposing in the master plan both a required thoroughfare and improvements to existing streets. But there will be a proposed condition on improving nearby intersections within or on the edges of Boynton Yards. In addition, there's a voluntary contribution through covenant of $2.40 per square foot for the Green Line extension, and that's to help the city with its $50 million obligation to the Green Line that was committed several years ago. And lastly, related to community impact mitigation. Now, I do want to say that the zoning requires substantial community benefits, not only the community center and the arts and creative economy space that's, for lack of a better term, a dimensional requirement in the master plan district. But developments of this size also pay housing linkage, jobs linkage, and dedicate 20% of any proposed units to inclusionary housing. But there's also voluntary contributions by covenant. And the developer has agreed to $1.40 community benefits contribution and $2 per square foot of additional mitigation. Those community benefits can mitigate displacement and other programs that are valued in the community, like first source jobs, for instance. So the voluntary contribution rates that are required by covenant are adjustable for inflation. They fund either existing stabilization accounts for city capital needs, or they can be distributed to community groups and partners implementing programs. And they can also be credited towards work complete instead of the per square foot cost. So with that, those are the conditions that will be proposed in the next staff memo. I also have Tom Galagani here if there's any question, our Director of Economic Development, who can answer any specific questions related to community benefits. But with that, obviously staff, including Director Sarah Lewis from Planning and Zoning is here as well, and the development team to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Could I have you go back to the financial portion of the community benefits? I think that
This
was.
one?
Yes. I think that I saw a total for what these would actually bring to the city budget. $10 per square foot, $254 per square foot. That means nothing to me. I kind of want to see the multiplication of what we're actually talking about, how much money these benefits will be worth, because we've seen it in other master plans. We've seen it with specific proposals and specific developments where it, to me, says this is a considerable amount. I don't know what $2.54 per square foot for a jobs linkage actually means. Like, how many square feet are we talking about in development, and how much of an impact is this going to bring? Because my understanding is this is substantial. I want to know magnitude of
I could address that. I don't know if I'm muted.
No, you're not.
Okay. So the housing linkage fee at $10 a square foot is applied only to the commercial property that is in excess of 30,000 square feet, which, you know, we're building about 1 million square feet of commercial space. So that's $10 million that would go into the housing linkage affordable housing fund.
So that's
The
$10 million straight. That's $10 million straight from the housing linkage.
Yeah, and that gets funded when each building is built. You know, that half of it is built at building is funded at building permit, and the other half, I believe, and when occupancy permit is issued. So it comes in 2 pieces. Most of them come that way as well. The jobs linkage is across the board on all buildings, whether they're commercial or residential. And so that's, you know, close to $3 million. The inclusionary housing is a percentage of the amount of dwelling units that we intend to build. And we intend to build right now 350 units. So that would be 70 units would be affordable. And the community benefits is also one that is applied across the board. And so that would be 1.4 million, probably about $2 million for community benefits. And this additional mitigation permit is kind of a catch-all. And this is something that US2 also had to pay. Most of these things are the same values as US2 paid, some of which were extracted through the community benefits agreements that they had, but others were in their developer covenant. In this case, this is all part of either the zoning or the conditions that we would agree to as part of the staff report and the board's, you know, decision. And
the
so in
covenant's
this case, excuse me?
The covenant has already been signed.
The covenant is not signed. It's in a draft form, and we have yet to. There's one other component here which has to do with infrastructure contributions, and as Melissa said, we are required to contribute to the infrastructure, and that's a negotiation that's ongoing. And when that is completed, the covenant can be signed. It's the only piece that's unfinished.
Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful in the way that I view the community impact that this master plan will bring to the community. I don't know if anybody else has any more questions at this point on this particular issue. And so Sam first.
It's not on this issue. So
Okay.
if other people want to talk on this, I'll defer.
Rob, what do you got?
I've got other questions. So in the same vein that Sam has questions on other topics. So whenever you're ready for those.
Okay. Let's do Sam then on what you've got.
Sure. We heard at the last hearing on this, and there are a lot of comments in the public comments submitted in writing about parking and traffic implications. Have those been studied? Has that analysis been presented? Can we hear a little bit more from either staff or the applicant about what the effect of 1,000 additional parking spaces is going to have on the neighborhood?
This is Melissa Woods. I don't know who from the development team can speak related to this question. The applicant submitted a transportation impact study and also has agreed to mobility management. Although the master plan proposes 1,000 of 1,500 space capacity that was studied in the Union Square neighborhood plan. So we do feel it is within reason, this application. The impacts of additional trips in this neighborhood do need to be mitigated. So I am not the expert. So I'd like to transition to anyone here from the development team that wants to speak to it or address it at a future meeting if necessary.
I can address it, but I would address it by saying that the plan is for this topic to be addressed at a future meeting when our consultant has completed his traffic mitigation study. It's been rescoped a little bit and the delivery of it has been delayed, but the scope and breadth of it has been approved by the city's transportation department.
Is now,
Hey, does Sam have any additional questions or follow-up?
No, it sounds like there'll be more to come. Thank you.
I think so, and I hope so, because you're absolutely right. I meaning to raise that because we got a lot of public testimony on that through the written submissions, and I'm glad you brought that up. Rob, go for it.
yeah, also in the transportation areas, we received a lot of public comments, putting aside the multi-use path adjacent to the train tracks that folks were articulating an interest in. A lot of public comments on specific streets, be it Windsor or Harding or Columbia, and the bike network itself. And one question I have, and maybe this is for the applicant, have you met with the Somerville Bike Committee and have they had an opportunity to review and kind of sign off and give kind of an endorsement of the overall the bike network that's being proposed?
I can address that as well. We have been working with Brad Ralston on the streets and pathways and from the beginning, and we had complied with the design that was originally suggested early on. But as we got deeper into this and studied it more, there was a decision to add bike lanes to both the north and south, the extended South Street and Thoroughfare 1, what we call. And there will be bike lanes on both sides in either direction for both of those major streets. The northern thoroughfare still is intended to be more of a pedestrian walkway as opposed to a vehicular-centric roadway. Not to say that cars won't go there. And then South Street, before it's moved and then after it's moved, is intended to be more servicing vehicles. And again, the design that has been submitted shows bike lanes on both sides as well as two-way traffic. And on the thoroughfare to the north, Thoroughfare 1, in addition, has 14-foot sidewalks to accommodate, plenty of pedestrian walkway.
Okay, thank you. I think it would be, I guess I'll go back and take a special review of some of those comments. I think I'll just say from my perspective, I understand that Brad Rawson and the city have reviewed the proposal, and I know, from a bike advocacy standpoint, there's a great deal of difference between a bike lane, a buffered bike lane, and a protected bike lane. And it would give me a great deal of comfort to know that, some of the advocates in the bike community and the stakeholders are on board with this proposal, or generally find that it's acceptable. And at this point, I'm not sure I've heard kind of that level of endorsement. So, but I have another question. I actually have a series of questions. I
Rob,
don't-
can I address that through the chair? This is Sarah Lewis, Planning Director. They're basically the bicycle committee, if they have any concerns, are usually at these meetings. As this is a very, public and open hearing process. But they have been, the team, as Mr. Fenton referenced, has been working back and forth with the mobility division very, very closely. So I hope the bicycle committee would be part of this public process rather than necessarily be a special invitation.
In addition, this is Melissa Woods. The conditions that we have been working on are aiming to address their concerns. So hopefully they'll be pleased with the next staff memo. Thoroughfare 1 in particular will go through the site plan approval process. So there's going to be a lot of community involvement in the final design of that. But the existing thoroughfares that the master plan proposes to improve, this is our bite of the apple. So the conditions really relate to the existing conditions of Earl, Harding and Windsor Street.
Thank you.
I do want to just reference it. We have seen some testimony on this. We have seen some concern, mostly through the issues regarding the community path, but it has not been the practice of this board, in my recollection, to solicit specific testimony from interest groups like the bike gang. The only time that I remember that we specifically asked for testimony from the stakeholder, it was a scientist, was the potential development that would have been on what's it called, the Assembly's Edge, Rebecca, where I was actually looking for specific scientific input on the feasibility of certain infiltration systems, because the applicant didn't have at the time the requisite background to be able to give us sufficient guidance. So Melissa's right that we usually hear from stakeholders. They're engaged at their own discretion, and it's kind of been against the inclination of this board to specifically reach out to potential stakeholders, just to get their input. Of course, we welcome it, and I can't imagine that they are not already invested in the review of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think my point there was, my understanding is that the Somerville Bicycle Committee is an advisory committee convened by, the administration. So, to the extent such advisory committees exist and are convened by the city, I guess that's why I kind of brought that up. But point taken on, independent stakeholder groups. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rob, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Just have a very quick question regarding the development site and also better understanding the impact to the neighborhoods, the adjacent neighborhoods, just from a connectivity perspective. And also, I understand that this development project is very much has strong transportation linkages with the GLX extension. However, I'd love to hear from the developers on what their thoughts are about, one, the adjacent neighborhoods, any thoughts, plans with respect to the interaction of pointing yards. And the second question is related to just the Union Square at large, the development district at large. Thank you.
Hi, this is
I'm
Rebecca
not,
Cooper. John, hang on just a second. I want to
yeah, sure.
verify that this is Rebecca Cooper speaking. I just want to verify that our chair just went off his video and hasn't dropped out.
Yep, I'm here. I froze, and there's a little green square around a black box, which is me.
But you are able to hear.
I can hear everything.
Excellent. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I didn't understand completely the first part of your question as it related to the surrounding neighborhoods. I don't know if you could just rephrase that. I just kind of missed a piece of it.
Sure, I apologize. Let me rephrase that. What I basically want to understand is this Boynton Yards development impacts on the adjacent neighborhoods. I know we've talked about the vehicular traffic, the bike lanes, and other considerations around the transportation side. But in terms of what is the development team looking to do to be a good neighbor, be part of this
Sure.
new neighborhood, this exciting project. Just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the core objective of the development is to serve the growing needs of the life science industry, and it's probably the one sector in the commercial real estate market right now that is still strong. And but I would say, a very close second. In order to make that successful, we need to integrate with the neighborhoods, and we need to activate ground plane spaces and outdoor spaces. And I firmly believe that as we begin to roll out the second and third building, particularly the second building and in the civic space design, I'm really excited about it. I mean, and it's going to make, I believe, a place that is going to be comparable to the best places in the metropolitan Boston area in terms of outdoor space and activities and community integration. Our strong interest, though, as a development objective, is to reach out and pull from Union Square and even Inman Square the types of uses and tenants that exist there, and have them bleed into one another so that we do integrate. They're going to be bigger buildings, but I think it's important that we have a ground plane that is accessible and welcoming to the public and to the community and to pedestrians and elders and kids and dogs, if you will. I mean, I think our goal really is to be part of the community. We have worked hard to integrate ourselves in supporting charities in Boynton Yards, and I should say Union Square, and becoming part of the Union Square Main Streets organization, and I think it's the key to this being the successful place that we want it to be. I think it's very important.
Thank you for the response.
If I could follow up on that, Mr. Chair, on just that very topic of integration into the community and creating that level of vibrancy. One question I had was, in Assembly Square, the development strategy was to build housing and storefront commercial first. And then the upper floor commercial, would follow, which is largely how it has been executed. Whereas this proposal has 3 phases of commercial lab, and the 4th phase being the housing. I guess one question I have through the chair to the applicant is there any reason why the housing component of this project couldn't or shouldn't be built as part of an earlier phase? And I ask in part because, as much as we want, lab and commercial and jobs, we're also sort of faced with an ongoing housing crunch So has that been considered at all, and sort of I guess what's the logic there?
I think the logic is mostly one of a business decision, you know, and an investment from a standpoint that the lab market was strong and has been for the last 10 years, and more particularly the last 5 years. In the beginning of our involvement here, I think we actually thought that residential was the first thing to do. And during over the 5 or 6 years that I've been involved with this project, while there's a strong demand for affordable and even, you know, market rate housing in the Boston area, the land costs and construction costs had risen to the point that the rental rates required to build, particularly high rise, in our opinion, have outstretched the demand, particularly in a market like Somerville. And that may change, but that distinction has gotten more stark, I think. I think that you know, the key to this place is establishing it as a life science cluster. And you know, certainly I think the second building will begin to establish the place as that. And then I think we can make decisions differently to round out the development and perhaps develop a mix of use included housing earlier than we anticipate right now. I mean, I think our plan is let's build 1, 2, 3 commercial and then finish with residential. It could happen that the third building or could be residential, or that we could build the third and fourth development simultaneously. I do expect the housing market to improve. But I mean, I think that's the honest truth is that you know, we need to make sure this thing is viable first, and the life science industry is what's going to make it viable and durable. And once we do that, and it'll happen with the first 2 buildings, I think we can have more flexibility in terms of what we choose to build next.
Yeah, I'll just say on that, to follow up, I know in Union Square, I believe there were conditions placed on the master plan special permit such that, you know, there was an ordering of, you know, what could be built when. And I only raise it because, you know, because we have had experience in Somerville where the last building never, it doesn't materialize, or it comes at a much later time. So it's just an observation, really, that I think there is a lot of community interest in making sure that that the housing does materialize.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, we had intended, when the zoning was different, to build more housing, and you know, went to a lot of the planning board and public meetings on the zoning, and really there was an understanding amongst the community and or the you know, the council that people just wanted to build residential, so they wanted to tap it down, you know, and it went from 40% to 25. We don't have, I mean, I think the housing is an important element. You know, at the end of the day, we want to build some semblance of an 18-hour environment, and 350 units isn't gonna do it. But you know, when US 2's D3 development happens, then that's going to change the ratio a bit. And there are other housing projects in the area, a lot of other housing projects, actually, mid-rises and others that are occurring, which we're grateful for. So I mean, it's certainly not that we don't want to build them. We're just trying to focus on a risk-adjusted approach, you know, to development.
Thank you.
Sure.
My other question, if there are no questions on that, I had one other question, primarily around, I've heard mention of this community center as being, and I understand that that's part of what's required, public, I forget the term that they use, but I'm not sure that I saw, do you have have you, in your application, have you detailed where you see this community center being, what building it will be part of, and sort of how, what phase that would be constructed?
We have got a couple of different options that we're studying right now, and some proposals to make as part of this process that we're in right now. I mean, I think the first notion would be that we would locate it probably in the third or fourth building, depending on what those are. But there's also some alternatives there that we would like to propose to the planning staff and discuss and see if those are acceptable.
Okay, I think that would be a critical detail that I think that the community is quite interested in. And my very last thing, I promise, and because I don't want to keep here all night and maybe they have other questions. But, you know, there's something that's still nagging at me about the earlier discussion we had when we were looking at the aerial views and, you know, the proposal for these lab type buildings, which I don't necessarily, I think the terminology is going to get at least me mixed up, because I have no issue with the lab use. But you know, if we were to approve what has been applied for through this discretionary master plan special permit process, it does, my understanding, narrow our degrees of freedom when you come back for design and site plan approval for these particular buildings. And so while we can have a discussion around the appropriateness of the massing and, you know, how they weave in with the surrounding neighborhood, I guess one concern I have is if we approve as applied for, you know, I guess I'm a little concerned that, you know, yeah, these are interesting images, and I think that there's a mutual and shared statement of interest in, you know, refining them and making sure that we're delivering something that the community will like and embrace. But I feel like we're kind of, you know, tying our hands a little bit, or not. We're sort of. I just feel like maybe we need to make that in writing or somehow more crisp, because at the moment those are kind of some scary visuals that I don't think anybody wants to see actually materialize quite like that. So again, that's just a concern I wanted to express.
If I may, this is Melissa Woods, address your question and statements, Rob. This is, you're right, this is sort of an umbrella approval. It is an approval of entitlement. And later site plan approval process is an administrative review process where you can mitigate impacts, but to substantially change a proposal without that the impacts are not proven would not be legal. So talking about transitions between between abutters is something that will very much likely come up in that discussion. Changing a building from, you know, significantly in its number of stories and reducing density is not likely. I will say your comments earlier, I think it's important that we take another look at the the Boynton Yards sub area, because there is some overlay east of the site that we anticipate redevelopment. And also the neighborhood plan calls for future planning in what we call Boynton Yards East, because It was actually really difficult to map in the zoning overhaul process. It had, from the old districts, it had BA, which was our, a business district that was intended to build strip malls. And I believe residential C, which is sort of an apartment building district, and even RB in that 3-block area of east of Horace, but running along South Street and Ward Street, I believe is the name off the top of my head. Some of those are actually already in redevelopment. Some of the mid-rise buildings that John was referring to. So we kind of have a evolving neighborhood that maybe needs some further community process just because of the impacts that are happening all around it. But you bring up good points, and I don't have the definitive answer for you, except to say that the master plan does give a level of entitlement that does create certainty in the future for the developer, but that we want to be mindful of in any approval by the planning board. Thank you.
Through the chair, this is Sarah Lewis, if I can add a little bit to that. The one thing I would like to keep in mind, getting to some of the things that have already been said, is the idea that a master plan can be revisited if the zoning allows it to. So for example, if the area, if the program split could go back to a 60-40, the idea then that the master plan could be modified to incorporate more residential is definitely in the realm of possibilities. So keep in mind, just as, sort of there are things that are moving within the Union Square D parcels right now that will require the CDSP to be reopened. Similar things could happen here because of the length of time it does take to develop these projects, and who knows what the market's going to be even in the near future, given what we've been dealing with this year. So I think we do have, while it allows the developer to move forward with a sense of a surety, as long as they are showing us and we are approving elements that meet the zoning, then the details can often be worked out and modified through the future processes. Does that help a little?
Yes, it does help me, and no, that is helpful. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any more questions at this point? All right. So I want to, Sarah, you've got a raised hand. I don't know if that was in error or if you wanted to say something else.
No, that was in error. I'm sorry. Let me put my hand down.
Okay, I just don't want to cut you off in the event that you want to add something for us.
I'm just waving at you guys, apparently.
We'll wave back.
So, no, I do want to thank the staff and the applicant for what I think has been a pretty productive conversation tonight. I look forward to seeing some conditions at our next meeting to see how we have materialized the discussions and the concerns that we've had. And I'd like to hear the thoughts and testimony of the public as well at our October 1st meeting. Is there anything else besides officially continuing this application to the first that we need to address? Sarah or Rebecca or Melissa? Okay.
I don't believe so. This is
I don't-
Melissa.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think so. In that case, the chair is going to continue the discussion of this application to the October 1st meeting, seconded by the clerk. Roll call vote. The chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Great, the vote is unanimous. And I want to raise one additional thing. At the planning board and land use committee's joint hearing that occurred on the 15th, I made a statement that we would be bringing up certain proposed map and zoning changes at the meeting this evening. We're not going to do that. There have been some issues regarding the appropriate noticing of adding those to an agenda item when we did. So we will be bringing them up most at the October 1st meeting. But I do need to vote to formally continue discussion on those agenda items. So that they can be properly noticed, and so we'll have an opportunity to join. So the chair votes to continue the several map changes, and there's some ministerial changes as well in language that were addressed at the meeting on 9/15. Chair moves to continue those to the October 1st meeting, seconded by the clerk. Chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Great. That vote is unanimous. I don't believe that there is anything else that is on the planning board's agenda this evening. Staff, am I missing anything?
No, Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. That is all of the business we have for this evening.
Perfect. Thank you all very much. The chair votes to adjourn, seconded by the clerk. Roll call vote. The chair votes aye.
Sam votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Thank you all very much. Have a good night. We'll see you in a few weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.